Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by. This is my next talk that I've got to do, and I've got to do it Saturday week. That's not long. So I'll put a soundtrack to it, because obviously when I do it for real, I'll be doing the talking and it'll be a silent movie. Not black and white and jerky, but you know what I mean. And the idea of posting this is that it gives you a chance to see it, yes. And in addition to that, I can't do things like spell check and, correct wording and things like that on a video. There is no tool to do that. So any spelling mistakes you spot, or using the wrong word, or anything along those lines, please shout. You're my people, because I've already looked at it and I can't see any. So anything that you spot, please let me know. And in addition to that, any changes you think that could be a major improvement that are not going to take me long to do, I'm happy with that sort of thing. But quite honestly, I haven't got a lot of time left, so sort of replacing video clips and all things like that's not going to happen. So we'll see how we go. So this is it. Thanks for that introduction. Let's see if I can live up to it. Most of you will have seen my last talk, and this is like a continuation, but please remember it's a video, so when I press the go button it's going to run for 45 minutes. So questions at the end please, not during. Thanks. So we started last time with every orchid grower starts somewhere, from one Phalaenopsis to many, from a few other types to many, from windowsills to conservatory, and in my case from conservatory to grow room. And this is the story of really how that progressed. So as a recap, we started off with one Phalaenopsis, and I'm sure this is a familiar story. Many of us must have started at this point, not necessarily with a Phalaenopsis, but most did. And then the story continued. The orchid fairies turned up and a few more Phalaenopsis arrived, and suddenly we're sort of starting a collection, although it may not have been intentional, but that's how it goes. And then all your windowsills end up looking like this, and your partner leaves home, your pets disown you, and your family think you're absolutely nuts. And we probably all got close to that sort of point at some point. Some of us may still be there. And then finally you get to, in my case, the grow room, where you've got loads and loads of orchids all squashed in together of many different varieties. And this story is that transition from those few orchids in the home to filling up a grow room and trying to look after all those orchids. So it wasn't an overnight success. Quite honestly, turning the conservatory into a successful grow room took time. It didn't happen overnight, and there were some failures on the way, shall we say. So we went from a sofa with a couple of chairs and a table with carpet on the floor to 240 odd orchids, some shelves, some hanging racks, some gadgets, and one hell of a workload. And that's the thing you need to watch for. You keep increasing your collection till suddenly it becomes a burden. You should have stopped a couple of weeks before. So this is the story of how I got there then. The conservatory was too hot in summer, too cold in winter, not suitable for plants or humans or even pets. So I took a window out and put in an extractor fan to try and get rid of the heat, and that did some of the job, and it wasn't enough, so I took out another panel and put in an inlet fan to get some cooler air in, and that helped. And then we added some shade netting, and that sort of helped, and then we added some circulating fans to get the old air moving, and that helped. And then the humidity wasn't good enough, so we added some humidifiers in the day, since been replaced, but we sort of got there eventually. But it was quite a long story, and I was very reluctant to put plants in there until I was happy that it was at least somewhere near it. So that was where, but what else evolved as I was going along? Well, I was using tap water, and then I thought, this is not good. I didn't know why, but I just thought it wasn't good. So I changed to filtered water, which was better. And then finally I got a TDS meter and wrote off that water and got an RO unit. And that at least gave me a base point. You could use rainwater, I suppose, but I would have difficulty collecting enough. So the RO unit came in. And I played with various fertilizers, and I ended up with the MSU fertilizer with some supplements. I've got CalMag, I've got calcium nitrate, and I've got some kelp extract, seaweed type stuff. So that's where I ended up along those lines. So yeah, pause for thought. That was a long story in a very brief amount of time. So really that's sort of where I'm going to start from today. So how and why did my collection grow? Well, it's difficult to say, it just did. I started adding a few orchids in, and I suppose you could say I caught the bug. And the bug took over, and like I said, you can end up running short of windowsill space quite quickly. And then you can start having shelves in your home, but you're losing your light level moving away from the windows. So, you know, the conservatory conversion was the way to go. And once I got in there, that was it. We got some shelves, we got space. Yeah, we soon ran out of that, didn't we? But nonetheless, that was the progression. And the collection just evolved. You know, oh, pretty bloom, I'll have one of those. Oh, there's another one of those, I'll have another one of those. Those don't do bad for me, we'll have some of those. Let's try one of these, let's experiment. And it just grew. It expanded as time went on. And I'm quite happy it did. It was a good thing. And what made it finally stop? Or virtually stop? Well, the most obvious thing is I ran out of space. Yeah, that's point number one. But point number two is the more orchids you've got, the more work you have to do. And that's the vital word, work. When it becomes work, maybe it's time to stop and back up a bit, because it's supposed to be a hobby. It's supposed to be enjoyment, not work. So you can overload yourself by you just keep adding to the collection, you get more and more, and suddenly you find you've got very little spare time and you begrudge looking after your orchids. Well, the time to stop was a while back. You've already gone too far. Well, you can always downsize. So that's really why I ended up with a static collection. So where have I ended up then? These are some of the orchids covering the genera included in the collection as at the beginning of May, just a week ago or so. I've got some Orengis. I used to have 4, I've only got 3 now. I lost 1. 2 have bloomed, 1 hasn't. The Mr. Sidii is working on it basically. I think it was a young plant. I've got 4 bulbophyllums. 1 has, well, actually 2 have bloomed, but I didn't take a picture of the Tingabararium simply because it's misnamed. But the others are coming along. I've got plenty of Cattleyas. Some species are in there, some hybrids are there, too many to name individually. There's a reason for this coming up. So pretty good selection of Cattleyas. I've got 3 Coelogenes. I'm happy with those 3. I don't need any more. The Moriana is absolutely stunning. Natida is very fragrant. I like my Cristata, that'll do. In the cooler growing section we have Masdevallias, some recent Draculas, Restrepias and some Miltoniopsis. I'm happy with the numbers I've got. I don't really need any more. I'm quite happy with that little selection. In the Oncidium range I've got loads, and they cover quite a variety in there. Brassias, Miltonias, some of the old Odontoglossums, and there are some actual Oncidiums in there if they haven't changed their names. These are some of my favourites in amongst that group. Lots of Tolumnias, I love those. And some others. I've got some Vandaceous types, a couple of Neophanesias, not Vandas, some Paphs and Fowls, some Apsychopsis, some Sarcochilus. But basically I went from one Phalaenopsis to well over 200, but which genus is missing? And it's the Dendrobiums. And this was one of those light bulb moments. Once I started getting a few of these, they just took off, and I've never looked back. So my craze for Dendrobiums, how did this happen then? Well, it just happened. It just so happened one of the eBay sellers, one of my favourite sellers, happened to be selling a lot of good ones. So I just got some good plants. How long has it been going on? About 4 years now. Has it ended yet? Well, maybe. But the big question is why? Now I'm going to pause and just let this run, because this should really explain why. Just look at the colours, the shapes, the sizes, the variety. It's all in there. And in amongst those are fragrant ones, some ones that bloom occasionally, some that bloom their heads off, very fragrant to no fragrance at all. Some are reliable, some are difficult to grow, all different shapes and sizes, and really that's what got the hold on me. I mean, look at that, come on. So really that's what took hold. It was the sheer variety that was available, and a fair old few were readily available as well. So, you know, it sort of took hold, I suppose you could say, but it wasn't planned. But when you get to something like that, that's why. It's as simple as that. That's why. So the rest of this presentation is all about my Dendrobiums. Where do I keep them? Where do they come from? And how do I look after them? And I'll show many that I own. I won't be showing all of them. I've got 50 Dendrobiums. We've got 45 minutes already. I'll do what I can. So where do I keep them? Well, the simple answer is obviously in the grow room. There's no plants in the house anymore. But what exactly is the grow room? Well, as I've said, it's a converted conservatory, but there's a little more to it than that, because it took some kit. And we'll have a look at this kit. What purpose, what function it serves, how it evolved, and where it's ended up. And where it is now, I'm quite happy with the kit I've got. I've got no plans on changing, but I do have to replace a bit now and again because it doesn't last forever. So I started with a 6-inch extractor fan. That went to 8 inches, which almost doubled the outflow of hot air from up near the roof. And its partner in crime is low down on the shady side, which pulls in cooler air, providing the air outside is cooler, of course. Both 8-inch fans, they work together. I've got some large circulating fans. These are 16-inch jobs. One oscillates at the top and the other one is static. They're turned on by a thermostat. When the temperature reaches a certain value, they kick in. Dotted around the place I've got these little 6-inch computer fans, and they're run from that phone charger up in the socket there, so they're 12 volts. And down here I've got one on each shelf, and that's for my cooler section. So things like the Masdevallias and their partners in crime get a constant flow of air 24/7 on 12 volts. And this year I got this beauty in, which is a hydrofogger, and that really does the business. It makes a bit of noise, but then it does the job. This chucks out a vast amount of humidity, and at the time the extractor's on, it's necessary. It runs off a header tank, and it's fed just by a little pipe that runs on a siphonic effect. You know, the water just replaces the water that gets used via the siphon effect. So no pumps or anything electronic, the water just flows naturally given the air pressure. And then I've got hydrostats and thermostats, and these are cheap Chinese jobbies, slow boat from China. They do the job, quite honestly, cheap and cheerful. They're a bit fiddly to wire up at first, and can cause a problem if you get it wrong, they'll catch fire. But they're good stuff, you know, a few quid on eBay. In the winter time, I've got a little heater, little fan heater, that again, it's thermostatically controlled, and I go down to 12 degrees centigrade in the winter, and this stops it getting any lower. So basically, that's the kit. And I've got a few of these dotted around, 6 quid on eBay. You get the temperature in Fahrenheit or centigrade. Fahrenheit if you're in the 18th century, centigrade if you're up to date. You get the humidity, relative humidity, and you even get a clock, all for about 6 quid. So I've got a few of those dotted around. So that's where I keep them. Now let's have a chat about where they come from. And this varies, yeah? And quite honestly, this is the key factor in looking after dendrobiums, is knowing this bit. This little bit of information will help you look after your dendrobiums. But generally speaking, we have an area. Allegedly, when the earth was one big mass, it split up into pieces, and the cattleyas went west and the dendrobiums went east. So from northern India across through to southern China, all the Philippines and northern Australia, that sort of area. So where exactly do they come from within that area? And the easy answer is forests. But what type of forests are we talking about here? And this is the critical point. I can't emphasize this enough. This is the business. Get your head round this and you've got the key to looking after dendrobiums. It really is that simple. So mainly from tropical rainforests, yes, but some come from deciduous forests, and some even come from those special places, the montane forests. Why is this important? Well, it dictates the care they need, their temperature ranges, their light levels, whether they need any special winter treatment. This is the key, the type of forest. It's so critical. So let's have a look at the rainforest then. The first thing you've got to ask yourself is, these are evergreen, but why are they evergreen? Well, they get no harsh conditions, so the trees can stay in leaf all year round. They don't get cold, they don't get short days, they don't really get subject to the seasons as we know them, so they don't really get any sort of spring or autumn. So they have a relatively consistent atmosphere, year in, year out. They do get a wet season and a drier season. No rainforests are dry for any length of time. The trees wouldn't be able to cope with it, would they? Think about it. All that lush green forest is not going to last long without rain. So they have no long periods without rain. How does this affect the orchids then? Well, unless they're sticking out the top of the trees, they don't get high light levels, do they? They're under the tree canopy. What are the temperatures like? Well, reasonably constant. Bit cooler in winter perhaps, if you can call it winter. But the temperatures are good most of the time. Amounts of water and nutrients from deluges in the rainy season to less water in those seasons. And where there's heat, there will be decay, and there's your nutrients. So let's have a look at the deciduous forest then. These are not evergreen. Why are they not evergreen? Because they get harsher conditions, so they don't stay in leaf all year round. They do get colder, and they do get shorter days. They are closer to our 4 seasons, but still not like our 4 seasons. But if those trees drop their leaves, it has a dramatic effect on the orchids in those forests. So what are the light levels then? Same as the tropical forest in the growing season, they've got leaf cover. When the leaves fall, what's the light level like? It's high. High light levels during those winter periods. Temperatures drop down in those winter periods. That's why the trees drop their leaves, and there's far less water around in those type of areas, so the amounts of water and nutrients in these type of forests is far less in the winter months. And that's it. That's the difference. That's the critical point. Montane forest then. There's not many dendrobiums come from these, but these are basically constantly wet, loads of mist and fog. They're not really seasonal, but most of them are at higher elevations, so they tend to be cool, constantly cooler. They don't get hot and steamy. It doesn't work like that. But I haven't got any of these, so I don't worry too much about that environment. It's difficult to recreate. So, top tips then. Evergreen forests. Without extra lighting and heating, your orchids from these places will slow right down in our winter. Hence the expression drier in winter, not dry, drier. Rainforests always get some rain. Deciduous forests. These need to cool down, these orchid types. They need that bright light. It's not a debate, they need it. It's where they come from. And they need to be kept almost dry because in these places the rainfall drops right off. Hence the expression dry winter rest. Not bone dry winter rest, dry winter rest. So once this all sinks in, you're on your way to just growing dendrobiums. Just find out those critical points, elevation and type of forest, and it virtually dictates the care. Yeah? Now, it might sound complicated, but back up a bit and just think about it. It isn't really. So let's have a look at some orchids then. I divide mine into sets, and set 1 basically is what would be continuous growers. Why would they be continuous growers? Well, they come from the tropical rainforests. These are your Latoria types, your your Phalaenopsis types, and a few others. These should stay warm, but don't in my conditions, so this little set suffer a bit with me, but they do okay. Yeah. Here's a little look at some of my Latorias, filmed a while ago because they happened to be in bloom at the time. These suffered a bit last year in that heat wave because I didn't have sufficient humidity, and quite honestly they got too much light. I didn't stick to the rules I've just told you. Yeah, tropical rainforests, not bright light. These were my new growths last year on this plant. They dumped their leaves. Suffered a bit, this plant. Nonetheless, it bloomed its head off, so it did well, and I was pleased that it managed to produce that many blooms, so good stuff. But the plant itself didn't do well. This is one of my favourites. I've had people tell me that this looks like a bird in flight, and I sort of see it. Beautiful shaped bloom, lovely sort of wings as a bird taking off. Very delicate patterning. This one's even blooming on an old leafless cane. It's also blooming out of the latest growth in this case. It's a young plant, that one, not an old plant. That hasn't been around long. There's only a few bulbs on it. Still bloomed. Latorias bloom at quite young ages. Now, come on, look at this. If this doesn't sell you on dendrobiums, looks like it's from an alien planet. It doesn't quite look right, but the colours are gorgeous. An absolutely stunning Latoria type. Love it. And some of the others I've got, this is one of my favourites, Roy Tokunaga White Knight. Very attractive blooms, lovely patterning, and quite large in the Latoria set. And this one has to be looked at very closely to actually appreciate its beauty. So that's set 1. Right, set 2 are the true winter resters, and why is this? Because they come from those deciduous forests, and this is the likes of your Anosmum, Jenkinsii, Aggregatum, Aphyllum, Lodigesii, and these should not stay warm, and they need the brightest light you can possibly give them in the winter time. Yeah, these do well for me because I actually accommodate for them, and some of the others suffer as a consequence. So many are put off from trying these, and the transition from the growing season to fully resting is not complicated. And the first thing you need to do is throw away your calendar and any books that refer to specific dates. You need to watch the weather. Watch what's going on as you head into autumn and into winter. We can get a late autumn with some really nice weather, and that will delay this process. So chuck away your calendar. Just do it. Watch your plants and watch the weather. Watch your conditions. Your plants will tell you. As the days shorten and the night temps drop down, they're going to slow down, and many will produce what's called a terminal leaf, where the alternate leaves on the canes, in pairs as they go down the cane, will suddenly end up as one. That cane's finished growing. So during November, reduce your feed down slowly but surely, and towards December start thinking about reducing your water. You're heading into December, true winter. So that's the process. And when you get into winter, you need the brightest light possible for these types. I take all my shade netting off them and put these plants next to the glass. They get direct sun for 2.5 months. Shade netting off the lot. I set up my heater, and that's set to a minimum of 12 degrees C. It used to be 15 and I didn't get the bloom, so I went down to 12. Watch that weather. So the rest of these were filmed in December. So here we go then. This is my Loddige SEI. They're all dendrobiums, so I can save saying that word every time. Now, these were the latest growths. These were last year's growths. And as we go into December, they start dropping their leaves. Now, if you weren't aware that this was going to happen, this could be disconcerting. But that's its natural flow. As it goes into the winter, these are previous year's canes, totally leafless. Well, they are now. And that year's growths will gradually drop their leaves through the winter. So that's its natural growth pattern. Nothing to worry about. Don't worry. Now this is Dendrobium anosmum. Now this one is a truly deciduous. You have to excuse the Christmas decorations. Well, it was that time of year. So this drops all of its leaves during the winter time. And it can be worrying, but this is their natural flow. And this gives you a clue where it comes from. The leaves on the trees drop, the leaves on the orchids drop. And that's a single growth that year. I haven't had this plant long. So the leaves dropped during December into January. So that's its natural course of events. We look forward to what happens next. This is Nestor. This is an anosmum cross with Parishii, I think, from memory. And this grew two nice canes up to full length, grow well in the growing season, push them hard, and then as they go into winter they start to drop their leaves. This is nothing to worry about. But you need to know the type of orchid you're dealing with, and is it one of these annually deciduous orchids? Because if it's not and it drops its leaves, you might need to worry. So not all the winter resters are annually deciduous. Many hold their leaves through their first winter and lose them in the second winter. You need to be aware of these differences. It could involve a cultural issue if you're getting leaves dropping at the wrong time. So get to know your plants, get to know when and if the leaves should drop. It's quite important to see how you're getting on. Now this is Friedrichianum, and what you're looking at there is last season's growth as we're filming in April, May time, and this pushed on some really good canes during the growing season. This is the previous year's growths. This is probably where it's going to bloom from. It won't bloom on the latest year's growth, not on this one. They're different, but it's dropping some leaves on those 2-year-old canes. That's the way this one goes. And this is Findlayanum. Lots of people like this one, especially on my YouTube channel, because it has unusual cane sort of shapes. It's got these bulbous nodes at each leaf joint. Quite unusual in its sort of form. That was the plant I bought, those little canes at the top. And then down here we've got previous year's growth. They're losing their leaves completely. And the current year's growth that aren't losing their leaves. Again, that's its natural form. That's the way it works. Get to know your differences. Okay, and then some of the winter resters actually hold their leaves for some considerable time, just to confuse us. Sometimes up to even 3 or 4 years, but they still need that winter rest. But they need a little bit more care, because they haven't dropped their leaves. they still need a little bit more water than perhaps some of the others do. So again, let's have a look at some of these. This is my Jenkinsii. There's a dramatic change coming up to this later on. The progression of growth in this is away from the centre. It's actually at this point in December heading up round the back of the mount, so it's causing me a bit of a problem. But you can see the progression of growth is away from the centre where the original plant was, and in the centre of the plant are the old totally shriveled leafless canes. They've had it, they've gone. They're not going to do anything ever again. That's quite important on this one. So these are the true winter resters. Now let's have a look at some of these in the spring and see what's changed. This is quite dramatic in some cases. Some are in bloom. These were filmed around the 25th of April. Some have already finished blooming, and many have started this year's growths, 2019. So this is the way they progress. So going back to the Loddigesii, this was in bloom when I filmed it. Most of the previous year's growths have gone, but the new year's growths are starting now, and some of them are starting from the base of the canes, but some of them are growing along the canes, and this is the way this one grows. It's even found growing on the ground, and it forms like a mat, a hump. And where these little cakeys grow, or plantlets, whatever you want to call them, they often take root into the branch or the ground where it's growing and form new plants. This is the way this one grows. Now this is the anosmum. It's just coming back into growth. Just starting to see the new season's growth starting at the top. But what happened to those canes we looked at? Well, that new cane from last year dropped all of its leaves, bar a couple, and it's now in full bloom. And this is worth waiting for. The fragrance on this is stunning. It smells like raspberries. No mucking about, it smells like raspberries, and it's quite powerful too. And very attractive blooms. They don't last very long, but they're well worth the wait. So that's how that one progressed. The Nesta is only producing one new growth at the moment. More will follow once the blooms drop. Some orchids don't tend to grow their new growth until the blooms drop, but I mean, look at this. That is well worth the wait and well worth the effort that you put into growing those canes up to full size. You have to excuse the mist, orchids in the mist, but the fog is on. But yeah, those two canes from the previous year are in full bloom, and there's not a leaf on the plant. They're all gone, apart from the new growths that are just starting. But I mean, look at that bloom. Absolutely stunning. One of my favourites. Right, so let's have a look at the same dendrobiums in the spring, and these are the ones that hold their leaves longer. These tend to bloom later in the year. Not always, but there's a tendency. So the annually deciduous ones bloom early. The ones that hold their leaves longer tend to bloom that little bit later, more into March, April, May time. So let's have a look at some of these. Okay, now this was the Friedrichianum. Some new growths are just starting. We've got the old leafless canes. Excuse that shouty loud yellow one, that's not what we're filming. But even on the 3-year-old canes have even got some flower spikes. But this blooms on the 2-year-old canes. So that was all last year's growth, that mass there. That's next year's blooms, not this year. The previous year's growth are growing spikes. This is where the blooms come from. So on this one, the blooms come from 2-year-old canes, not 1-year-old canes like the anosmum types. They have their differences. This is going to be quite a mass blooming this time round, and with all that new growth next year it's going to be even better. So that's that one. And then the Findlayanum just coming back into growth again. There's the original plant at the top. Some of these growths are coming part way up the cane, and again this one blooms on the 2-year-old canes. So last year's growths aren't in bloom at the moment. The previous year's growths are in bloom. So that's the way this one runs, and some of the canes can produce Cakeys. Now I don't mind that. That's plants for other people. That's freebies, giveaways. I like all that sort of thing. You know, a community spirit. You give me some, I'll give you some. All that sort of stuff. Anyway, the blooms on this are absolutely fabulous. Very little fragrance on this one though. Now my Jenkinsii is a bit special. That was it in its full bloom. It's completely finished now. That's an early bloomer. Does it drop its leaves? Does it hell? It holds its leaves for some considerable time. Yeah, so that's what it looked like when it was in bloom. But we had a problem with that. We had to get rid of that dead bit in the middle to make it look good. So this has been ripped off the mount unceremoniously. All the growing areas have been divided up and remounted on a single mount with the potential growing points in all parts of the plant. So they're not just round the outside anymore, they're all over the mount. So this is now going to grow this season in all directions, including the centre of the mount. So next year, when the blooms come, they'll be all over the mount in a nice even form. So that one's just had dramatic changes done to it. Quite dramatic, in fact. Ripping it off the mount was great fun. Remind me of Velcro. So let's have a look at some of my others now. Now these go from the tiny to the giants, all shapes and sizes and all colours. And this is partly my passion with the dendrobiums, is the sheer variety. Have I got a favourite? Yeah, of course I have. It's all of them really, otherwise I wouldn't be collecting them, would I? So let's have a look at some of the other dendrobiums that I've got. Now this one is Hercoglossum, and if I had to have a favourite, this may be one of them. It's got an unusual growth pattern. It chucked out a load of roots last year, but this is last year's growths right at the top of the plant. They're still growing. Yeah. Down here are the previous year's growths. They're still growing, and some of them are coming into bloom. The 3-year-old canes around here, and most of the leaves have dropped from those, and most of those have got buds on or coming into bloom, and so have the 2-year-old growths. Yeah, this is a bit special, but you have to look at it in a certain way. So with the help of technology, I'll brighten this up. When these are viewed from below against the light, they have a glow to them. They are quite special. They might not be giant blooms, but this one performs well for me. It's always a star performer. It has been for years. Mass blooming this time of year, and they're not large, but they're pretty special. So that's that one. So look at some of my nobile types. I haven't got that many, quite honestly. Now this is Spring Dreamer pollen, and these are kikis. These were taken off at the beginning of last year and potted up. This has had no winter rest whatsoever, no special treatment, and these are kikis. And what have we got? A mass blooming. Nobile hybrids do not need the real special treatment. This is my prima donna. This is how to ruin a nobile. You have a mass blooming and you get a best hybrid in show last year at Wessex, and you wait for the blooms to finish before you repot it, and then you split the plant at the same time. That disturbance stopped this plant growing properly during last year's season. So although it's got some blooms in some of the gaps on some of the older canes, yeah, some leafless canes, last year's growths, yeah, did not reach their full size. So if you want to mess a nobile up, pot it late. If you want to do it properly, pot it early. Some of the others I've got then, weird and wonderful. This one here is a strange one. It was a gift, and it's Fangin Chiense, and apparently it's the rarest orchid I've got. It comes from a mountain in China called Fangin, and that's the only place it's found, and it's quite a recent discovery, so it's a gift. This is a true miniature, and this is Lichenastrum, and that's its size. Got some new growths coming on this, and apparently that could bloom this year. My little Cuthbertsonii, that bloom has been out since January and it's still going strong. I need to mount that actually. It's not doing as well as it should be in that little tray of moss, but I put a pen there to get some impression of size. Now this is a nobile type, lovely virgin angel, and again these are kikis and yet they're in bloom, but this is a dwarf nobile. It doesn't grow large, so that's some of the minis, some of the tiny ones. This is one of my Phalaenopsis type dendrobiums. This one, as this type go, is quite large. It's a very attractive bloom. I don't have too many of these, and quite honestly they don't grow that well for me. They get too cold in the winter, quite honestly. But it's grown some new growths. They do eventually become leafless, but they should take a few years before they drop their leaves. Most of the spikes come out of the apex, but they can come out from lower down. Lovely bloom on that one. Now this is a new acquisition. This is Lindleyi, or aggregatum as it was once called. Why, I don't know, because its common name is Lindley's dendrobium. But I'm hoping to grow this on and get some blooms next spring. So a recent acquisition, that one, like a giant Jenkinsii. This is a little Aussie one, Fleckery. Only one eye on this one. And looking at the back to see the blooms, because it happened to bloom the wrong way round, or back to front. This one's not growing that well, but it's starting to perk up. It's producing some reasonable roots, and it has at least bloomed. I've got a single bloom there, and for the first time ever, 2 blooms on 1 cane on there. So that's Fleckery, an Aussie one. A nice little plant, attractive blooms. Now this one is Conico. This is a Victoria Regina crossed with something. Goldschmidtianum, I think, is the cross. This is all last year's growths. Yeah. Down here are the blooms on the previous year's leafless canes. So that's this one style. Beautiful blooms. And this one's just coming back into growth as well. And given all those new growths, I think we should get some good blooming on this. These are some of my black hair types. I won't use the expression that they use because I don't like the word within it. But this is an Infundibulum cross. So named black hair type because the canes are covered in the most minute black hairs. This one I nearly lost, Formidable, but it's just growing a massive new growth, and I think I might have a bud at the top there. And this is a very recent acquisition from the 60th anniversary show, and this is Frosty Dawn. This had a single bloom on it when I got it, and it's now producing another one. So I do have a few of these black hair types. This is Dendrobium Surli. This is a real favourite on my YouTube channel called Mr. Hairy. Now this is a black hair type that has white hairs, hence the name Surli, old man. These are not easy to grow. I may get some blooms on this, I may not, but the plant's looking good. Now this is Chrysotoxum, a bit of a giant. We're moving up a scale or two now into the biggies, and I got this from Lynn actually at the Bournemouth Orchid Society auction because nobody else wanted it, and I felt sorry for Lynn because she was going to have to take it home. But beautiful blooms on this, but boy are they short-lived. Lovely fragrance, strong fragrance, beautiful blooms, and probably only once a year. I haven't had it that long, I've only had it a year basically, but it's a bit of a giant, that one, but good blooms, I like it. And this is Hancockii, in my environment known as the big bush, because it grows like a bush. Beautiful waxy flowers, lovely honey fragrance, but now we're getting into the real big stuff. I've practically got to leave the room to actually get this in shot. It grows like a bamboo bush, grows really tall, long canes that arch over, and then they branch. The canes actually branch out. But they've got quite a few blooms this year, I'm quite pleased. But it is a bit of a monster. And this has a story. This was hand-picked from a nursery by a friend on YouTube. And when she got to where they were, she couldn't believe how big they were because she had to post this to me. So she chose one of the smaller ones. So that was one of the smaller ones that they had for sale. Goodness knows how they posted the larger ones, but this thing can grow up to 2 meters. You can see the 30 centimeter ruler there. So many have not been mentioned, but with over 50 dendrobiums and just 45 minutes, there's only so much you can do. I've got no need to buy any more. Yeah, you can giggle if you like. Except one. I want a good Victoria Regina. Yeah, I really want a good version of that because I love the blooms. And so far, all I've found is manky little ones and seedlings, and ones that are half dead. So if you've got one and you want to get rid of it, come and see me later. Yeah, so that's it really. And thanks for listening. I hope you've enjoyed it. And now for the really difficult bit. Are there any questions? But thanks for listening, thanks for watching, and I hope you've enjoyed my orchids, especially obviously specialising in the dendrobiums, although it wasn't intentional, it just happened by the way. But I'm pleased it did. They are my favourite genus, and it's the variety and the vastness of that genus that appeals to me, plus the variations in the care. Some of these are hard work, some are easy, but I just like the challenge. So thanks for watching, and now let's get down to the questions.